Kelly Spence and welcome to my first painting tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how I paint realistic snow-capped mountains with an easy water reflection. So I'm reasonably new to painting. I've only been painting for about 3 years now just as a hobby, but I thought I'd show you anyway how I paint mountains. And who knows, you might get lots out of it. Firstly, let's have a look at the materials we'll be using today. In this tutorial I'm using Windsor & Newton's Liquin Original. I use this just to help the paint move around a little bit easier on the canvas, but you can use any kind of oil that you like, such as linseed oil. I'm only using 5 colours for this tutorial today, plus I also use a little bit of lead white at the end, but that is totally optional for you. And obviously you can use whatever brands you like the best. But I'm using a variety of Windsor & Newton and Wiliamsburg, which I really like. And the colours are titanium white, burnt umber, ultramarine blue, ultramarine violet, chrome green and Viridian. And I'm just going to keep it super simple today with brushes. All I'm using is a basic dagger and a basic fan brush, plus a palette knife to mix the colours together. I've just made a quick sketch of the mountains with pencil on a canvas paper that I'm using today. Feel free to pause the video to copy, or you can also draw your own mountains, it's totally up to you. Now let's get into mixing our colours. Firstly, I'm just going to take some of that titanium white and ultramarine blue. This ultramarine blue is a different brand than the one I showed you at the beginning there. Which I don't really like this one, but we'll see how it goes. I'm using a palette knife to mix the colours together, and the reason that I don't mix my colours with my brush is just to protect the brush, to stop the oil paint from getting too far up into the bristles and into the ferrule itself. And the less paint you have in your brush at the end of the day is better, because it means you won't have as much paint to clean out. Next, I'm just taking some more of that titanium white, ultramarine blue and ultramarine violet and mixing it together. These are going to be the sky colours, and in real life the lower, or the further you look out to the horizon, the lighter the sky is, and then as you start moving up, the darker it gets. So I'm just making 2 different colours here to go with the sky. And I've just used some of that burnt umber to kind of dull back those colours. This is a paper palette that I'm using here. It's super handy because when I'm done I can just tear off the top layer and throw it in the rubbish bin. But I have to keep in mind that the surface of it is white, which means here the colours as I mix together are going to look a lot darker than they would on the canvas at the end. So I may have to adjust the colours, we'll see once I try it on the canvas first. Now I'm just going to grab a little bit of that Liquin to put into the paint. That was probably a little bit too much, but this is just going to allow the paint to move around on the canvas a little bit easier. But if you feel like you enjoy using the paint without Liquin or extra linseed oil, then do you. Okay, let's give this colour a jam first. As I said before, the closer to the horizon line you look, the lighter blue it gets. So I'm just going to put this light blue just above the mountain tops here, and make the blue gradually go darker and darker as we head towards the top of the canvas. Now I'm not being too pedantic about following the pencil lines that I made earlier exactly. It's just a guide, and we can always come back and fix up the shapes and things later on in the painting. Now if I'm going a little bit too fast, you don't have to rush along with me. Feel free to hit that pause button whenever you want and continue whenever. Now I'm just going to grab a bit of that darker blue and mix it in with that lighter blue to give us a bit of a mid-tone between the two, and that's just going to make the gradient in the sky look a little bit more natural and seamless as we blend it together. Now to blend this together, I'm just going to go back and forward with my brush, moving slightly up and down as I go, and continue doing that until I'm reasonably happy with how it's blending together. Next I'm going to go on and grab some of that darker blue colour that we made and just pile it on at the top. And as the colours meet together, I'm just going to continue going back and forth, up and down, until it reaches the gradient that I'm happy with. All I use the fan brush for in this tutorial is to just brush out gently the brush strokes that I've left behind. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, feel free to not. I'm just going to roughly kind of guess where the mountain reflection is going to be and where I need to do the sky. I'm just going to add a little extra sky in to where I think the sky and the mountain reflections meet. This is just so in the future when I put in the mountain reflection, it's going to make it easier to blend. Okay, mountain time. I'm just going to use some of that sky colour that I was using before. Because we're going to start with the most distant mountain, I want it almost to look like the sky color, just a bit darker, so that we can define it a little bit. So to make it a bit darker, I'm just going to use a little bit of that burnt umber there. It's got a little bit brown, so let's just add a little bit more ultramarine blue. And I think it's still probably a bit too brown, but if I add some more ultramarine violet and blue, it's probably going to go a little bit too dark, so I'm just going to add some white in at the same time, and let's see how that goes. It's a bit too much on the grey side, so I'll add a little bit more ultramarine blue and ultramarine violet. Now I'm pretty happy with that colour. Just add a little bit more ultramarine violet to make the blue not so similar to the sky colour. And I think we've got it. And before we commit, I'll just do a little tester to see if it's the right colour, and pretty happy with that. So let's go ahead and start painting it on. And I'm just going to mark out the horizon line a little bit, just to kind of get my head around where the reflection for the other mountain is going to go. And this just lets me know where I need to paint this first mountain up to. Here is where you can shape your mountain a little bit. You don't have to do it exactly as me, feel free to do whatever you feel looks best. As we move down here, I'm just going to kind of mimic the shape of the mountain top. Doesn't have to be exact because we are going to blend it a bit, but it helps to kind of keep that realistic look. Like we did in the sky, I'm just going to go back and forth, up and down, just to blend the two colours together. And again with the fan brush, just to get rid of some of those brush marks that I've got. lost a little bit of my mountain top there, so I'm just going to go back and define a little bit further. Now, because we want the mountains to be roughly the same colour, I'm just getting a little bit darker as they come closer to the viewer. I'm just going to use that same colour that we were just using for the first mountain there. Make it a little bit darker by adding some of the colours that we've got there into it. And again, I don't want it to be too brown, so I'm just going to kind of play around with some of the colours, getting that perfect colour that I need. As you can see by those little dots there, I have tested the colour and pretty happy with that, so I'm going to go ahead and start blocking in the second mountain. Down here I'm just going to keep in mind that the reflections are mirrored, so I'm going to bring in that colour a little bit further so that I can blend the closest mountain into that. Fan brush again to get rid of those brush strokes. The other reason I'm using a fan brush for these distant mountains is so that the colours kind of blend into the sky, because when we look at mountains that are quite far away, the details aren't very defined. And then I'm just going to bring the fan brush down to the water and blend in those colours a little further. Because the mountain on the right here, I want it to be about the same distance away as the mountain we've just done, I'm going to use the very same colour to paint this one. don't really like the shape of that mountaintop there, so I'm just going to use that same colour and change the shape a little bit, play around and see what I like. And then we're just going to bring in that colour to where the reflections are going to be, so take it into where that main mountain is going to be so that we can blend it into that one later on. Now let's start on our closest mountain, which is going to be the main focus. So just again that same colour, and we'll make it darker because things that are closest to us tend to be darker in colour due to the atmospheric perspective. Okay, pretty happy with that colour, so let's get started. I lost some definition of the mountaintop when I was blending in the sky, so I'm just going to go back and kind of think about how I want that top to look and just paint it on. We want the edges of this mountain to be more defined and crisp than the other mountains. Because it's closer, it will be more defined in real life, but also it kind of makes the eye drawn to things that are sharper, and this is our main focus mountain. So we're just going to keep those, the outline of this mountain, reasonably sharp. I'm just going to keep playing with the shape of the outline of this mountain until I'm happy with it, and feel free to do the same with yours. Just keep reshaping it until you're happy with it, but be careful you don't go too far because it just makes it a little bit harder to put the sky colour back into it. and just getting rid of those brush strokes again, but I'm going to be careful not to blend it too far because I do want those edges to be crisper than the other ones. Still not quite happy with the top of this mountain, so I'm just going to keep fiddling. Fan brush pushed a little bit of that mountain colour into the sky, so I'm just going to use it again to wipe that away. And up and down, side to side with that fan brush, just getting the reflections blended in really nicely. And we've got the base colours for the mountains all complete, so let's get started with the snow. At the top right there I've just saved my leftover mountain colours. That's going to help us later when we do the trees. Start with some titanium white and we'll mix a little bit of liquid into that since this one is quite stiff. And adding some of that ultramarine blue. A little bit too much, so I'll just wipe it off there and mix it together. And we don't want it to be overly powerfully blue, so we'll just grab some of that burnt umber just to dull down that colour a tad. Just a little bit, too much, a little bit. Alright, let's give that a try. Cool thing about a dagger brush is that it comes to a point there, so we could make lots of different sized strokes, which is very helpful when doing snow. It's not really much going through my head doing this at the moment, just putting on different kinds of brush strokes, different sizes, different widths and lengths, just to kind of make it so it's not so repetitive. Because we're painting this wet on wet, you will need to pick up a lot more of that paint onto your brush because the base colour of the mountain under there is going to mix in with it a little bit. But I like doing it this way because it means that some of that snow will be varied in colour as it mixes with the base colour of the mountain. And using that same colour, I'm just going to do the same thing on the mountain next to it, just making sure that I don't make all the mountains look the same with the snow. the closest mountain, same color, same technique. For this part here, I am kind of imagining in my head the parts of this mountain that would stick out a bit forward towards the viewer, and kind of shape those parts by putting a little extra snow on them. And there might be a few little lonely bits of snow down there, so I'll add those. And last but not least, let's get onto this mountain. And we don't want those distant mountains to be as defined as the ones closer, so I'm just going to gently fan brush that so it's a little bit more blended. And then the same things with all the mountains, just getting less and less blended as the closer the mountains get. And to start with the trees or the bush on the mountain, I'm just going to use some of that sky color that we used to begin with, because that color is quite close to the mountain that we used, and we we don't want it to look really obvious and bright green, so to start with sort of that base colour that we've already got is going to help a lot to make the bush a little bit more realistic in colour. So first I added a little bit of that Viridian green to the sky blue that we had, and then I'm just going to use some of that chrome green to brighten it a little bit. Now it's probably darker than the mountain, so I'm just going to add some titanium white. We want the base of that base colour of the mountain to be the darkest colour on there, so just lightening it up a little bit. And let's give that a try. Turns out this was a little bit too dark, so I've just went in and put some extra titanium white and some more chrome green into it, and I think this looks like a pretty good colour. I'm just using the very tip of the dagger brush again, kind of like how I was putting on the snow. We're kind of just making like little clumps of bush here, pushing that paint into the wet paint that's already there. But we do want to keep in mind that we want quite a lot of that base colour of the mountain to show through, because that's going to act like the shadows. So I'm just kind of thinking, if the sun was hitting it, where would the light pick up on those bushes, and then that's where I'm going to put this paint. And I'm not going too low because I know that that's where we're going to put in the bush reflections there, so just trying to keep it in line with the edge of the water there. Again, since this is the most distant mountain, we don't want it to look too defined to keep the whole painting a bit more realistic, so I'm just going to use that fan brush to slightly blend in those colours a little bit. Okay, well that will do for now, so let's move on to the bush in the slightly closer mountain. So as things move closer to us, the shadows get darker but the colours get more vibrant. So I'm just going to make this slightly more green, a little bit darker in colour, so it's still kind of matches up with the base colour of the mountain. So sorry here everyone, I didn't realise that the camera wasn't recording this. But just continue the same as we did in the first mountain, just pushing the paint in with the tip of the dagger brush and making sure to keep lots of that base colour of the mountain showing through underneath. For the bush reflections, I'm just going to use the exact same colour and just kind of, instead of pushing it into the canvas, I'm just going to glide it down across the top of that colour that we've already got there. And then the same thing with the mountain before, just using that lighter colour. And then just using our trusty fan brush to blend it in a little bit further to make it look a bit more realistic. Now I'm just making up the bush colour for the main mountain here, keeping that bush colour that we've just used next to it just as a comparison so that I kind of know roughly what colour I need to go with. I'm making it a bit more green because the mountain is closer, but I'm also adding in some of that original mountain base colour that we have here, just so that it all kind of links together really nicely. And now just doing the same thing, pushing that paint into the mountain here to create some bush-like shapes. And I am still thinking about where the sun would be hitting the bush, and that's where I'm kind of putting the colour on. And since this is the base colour for the bush here, I'm just going to blend that in slightly. And then I'm just going to use the same colour as I was using for the mountain before, that one at the front. Just use the same colour and do the same thing. And then, like the other mountains that we've done, just glide that same colour into the water line there. Then I've just picked up some of the colour that we used for this mountain here and just did the same thing for the reflections. And then just blend them out a little bit. I'm just going to make some of these reflections a little bit longer to make them a bit more interesting. And a final little fan brush here just to even it out a little bit, and then that's our first pass all done and dusted. So I'm going to let that sit overnight to dry and then work on it tomorrow morning when it's dry. New day, so nice clean palette here. I've got all the colours that I started with on my palette, plus some of the colours that I managed to scrape off yesterday when I was tidying up. So some of the bush colours that I had and some of the base mountain colours. Here I've just got titanium white with a little bit of ultramarine blue and liquin. This is going to be for the snow. This colour is a lot more white than the one we used yesterday for the snow. This is just to highlight those parts that I think the sun will really hit. So I'm being really selective here, not putting too much on, but just to kind of give the illusion that the sun is hitting the mountain. So by putting some white a little bit further down on the mountain but not going any further over to the right, kind of gives the illusion that the sun is a little bit lower in the sky and that it's obviously coming from the left. So I'm just going to put some more highlighted snow over this side just to continue with that illusion. I'm going to start the same thing on the next mountain. I'm going to keep the same white. I'm not going to make it any lighter in colour because since the base colours of the mountains are darker, the white is going to look a lot lighter anyway. So there's no need to change the colour here, and I'm just going to do exactly the same thing as before, kind of imagining where that sun would hit the mountainside. Okay, same colour, new mountain. Just going to continue to put the colour on where I think the sun is going to hit the mountainside here. Just highlighting some of those lonely little snow spots. Okay, I'm just going to add some snow a bit further down the mountain here to make it kind of look like this part of the mountain is sticking out a bit closer to the viewer. But I'm still keeping in mind that I'm only going to put on the snow where I think the light would hit this part here, so I'm not going too overboard. just going to do the same thing with the same colour for the very last mountain here. Now I'm just going to go back in here with some of the very first snow colour that we used yesterday, just to add a little bit more on, because I feel like we can see a bit too much of the base mountain colour there. The only thing down here is the highlighted white, so I'm just going to go back in and add that darker snow here just to make it look like there's a bit more on this area. The reason that I'm using my finger every now and again is just to blot out or smudge out some of that paint that I've put on. Sometimes it goes on a little bit too thick and a bit obvious, so just use my finger to kind of take a little bit of it off and make it not so obvious. Just keep in mind though, if you also do this, make sure you wash your hands frequently and don't put them anywhere near your mouth or your eyes, because some oil paints are very toxic. And on that note, it's a good idea when you are painting not to eat or drink anything in the same area for that reason. Alright, I'm pretty happy with that for now, so let's get started mixing up some of that highlighted bush colour. Okay, so I'm going to start with some of that titanium white, and then I'll be adding in a little bit of the chrome green there. I find that the chrome green gives it a little bit more of a yellowy colour when it's on the mountains opposed to the Viridian. And since we're going to be putting this colour where the sun should directly hit the bush, I do want it to look a little bit more yellowy green, just to make it look like they're really sunny spots. The screen that we're making here is going to be for that distant mountain, so I'm just adding in some of that original sky colour that we used just to kind of tie everything together a bit. I do suggest when mixing your colours, especially for this part here, to just dab a little bit of the colour onto the spot where we're going to be putting it on, just to make sure if it's the right colour and it suits everything. Since the underpainting now is dry, if it's the wrong colour it's very easy to just wipe off and try again. And once you're happy with the colour that you've got, just do the same thing as what we were doing with the first bush colour, and just kind of pushing it onto the canvas using the tip of the brush here. And then using that same colour there, I'm just going to do some of those highlighted reflections where I've put the highlighted bush on. And once I'm pretty happy with the amount and places of where I've got them, I'm just going to use my finger to kind of drag that reflection down a little bit. The reason I can do this is because that the painting underneath is dry, so it's just an easier way to blend it out a little bit. So like I've said a couple of times before, as these mountains move closer, the shadows are going to be darker, but the highlighted areas are going to be more vibrant in colour. So I'm just going to use that same colour that we used for the mountain just there, just make it a little bit more green. Now I'm not putting this highlighted bush colour on top of the bush colour we've already got on there because I don't want to completely cover that. I still want to have it look like there are some darker bush bits there that are slightly more in shadow. So I'm just being careful that I put them in places that's not covering all of that bush colour that's already there. And pretty happy with that at the moment, so just doing the same thing with the highlighted reflections here. And because this mountain here, I want it to look about the same distance away as the one we've just done, I'm going to use the same green that we were just using and put it on this mountain here. adding a few more of those highlighted reflections here where I've put the highlighted bush. Alright, last mountain to go. So I'm just using that same green colour again. I want to kind of change the colour just slightly. I might put a few slightly different greens in here just to make the bush a little bit more interesting. So I'm just going to dabble with the Viridian and Chrome Green and kind of see what colour I like. So you can kind of see here as I'm putting this new green colour on the mountain that it's not quite so yellow as the mountains that we've just done. That's because I've put in a bit more of the Viridian instead of just the Chrome Green. Gives it a little bit more of a limey green colour instead of yellow. But I quite like it at the moment. I probably will put in a couple of slightly varied greens in this mountain just because it's the focus one and I want it to look a little bit more interesting than the others. It's really easy to go overboard here, so I suggest taking a step back from your painting to kind of give you more of a wider vision of what you're doing. Being really careful that you're not going too overboard, putting too much of that colour on, because we do still want to see lots of that shadowed bush under there and also lots of that mountain base colour just to give it a lot more depth. As I get a little bit lower here, I am keeping in mind where that water line would be. I don't want to go too far down because I don't want it to interfere with where I want the reflections to go. You can kind of see now that I have used the paint to make the mountain look like it's got a few ridges and valleys in there just by only putting that lighter highlighted colour on the very tops where the ridges I think would be. And I'm also going to put some of it just on the edge here, just to kind of trick the viewer in making it look like that part there sticks out a bit more and just catches that sun a little bit. Now I'm just going to add a little bit more of that chrome green into the same mixture, just to kind of give it that little hint of yellowish to put on the highlighted areas, and that's just going to just make those highlighted spots really pop. Then I'm just going to bring that same colour into the shadowy areas down in those valleys there, and then just to kind of give it a little bit more depth with a couple of different colours in there. Now that first highlighted colour, I'm just going to drag it down into the water to make it look like it's got reflections. And then I'm just going to use my finger again to smudge out the reflections a little bit. You can use a dried brush if you don't want to use your finger, but I just find this quick and easy and I like the effect that it makes. And after giving it a few final touch-ups, I'm going to let this painting dry again so that we can put some glazes over the top. To make the water look a bit more realistic, I'm going to glaze it a little with some lead white. I know many people don't use lead white because of its toxicity and availability around the world, but it's so much easier to use in glazes because it has less tinting strength, so it won't overpower the glaze, and it's much less opaque than titanium white. But if titanium is all you have, then you can still use it in this step. So since lead white isn't a fully transparent paint just by itself, I'm going to add a bit of Liquin here just to thin it out a little bit. You can use an oil like linseed oil if you like, but just to keep this tutorial pretty simple, I'm going to stick with Liquin here. So I'm making it really nice and smooth, the paint's really thin. I'm going to add a little bit of blue to this, just because I don't want the reflections on here to be stark white. I do kind of want it to match in with the painting, so we'll give it a little mix and see how it goes. I'm going to start with this by just defining that water's edge where the water touches the mountain there with the lead white that we've just made. To make it straight, I'm just using a straight piece of cardboard that I found lying around. You can use whatever you want to. If you've got a steady hand, feel free to do it by hand, because obviously, as you can see, sometimes even something straight doesn't tend to work. And since this is lead white, I'm not going to touch it with my fingers because lead is very toxic. So I'm just using a paper towel here to just wipe off the little bits that need to be wiped off, and just touching it up where it needs to be touched up. Now just keep in mind that this painting now is completely dry to the touch. You do want it to be completely dry before you put these glazes on, because if you do need to rub some of it out or wipe some of it off, you can without interfering with some of that paint that's already on there because it's dry. And now I'm just using a fan brush to kind of blend it out a little bit and make it a little bit softer so that it's kind of looks like it's a bit further in the distance. And then I'm just going to do the same thing with the rest of the mountains, just defining that line where the water meets the mountain. I'm just going to keep fanning it out until I'm pretty happy with how soft it is, and then we are going to get into putting that same colour, just not having too much on the brush, just a little bit, enough to put some on the canvas and kind of just move it back and forth, and this creates some subtle little changes in the water just to make it look a little bit more interesting. And then once I've smoothed it out with my dagger brush, I'm just going to go in with the fan again and just see if I can take just a little bit off paint off the top of the surface and onto the fan brush, just to make it a little bit more transparent, and then just kind of soften the edges a little bit to make it look like a reflection. So from here, feel free to add more or less of these glazes that you want, and then you can kind of tweak little bits around your painting that you think might need tweaked highlights, or add some more darks in there. Totally up to you. You can make it look as interesting as you'd like. Congratulations, well done on making it to the end of this tutorial. And that wraps up the tutorial how to paint snow-capped mountains and water reflections. I really hope you enjoyed painting along and you learnt a thing or two. I'd love to see your recreations, so tag me on Instagram at Kelly Spends Painting and I'll post them to my story. Let me know what you thought of the tutorial in the comments below, and let me know what you'd like to see in the next tutorial. See you next time!